basically it's just us and that. But he came right yesterday. You're at Madeline Island?
Yup. Yep. Was.
Maybe two just get chairs just for stage presentation. It looks a lot better camera wise.
Sounds good. That's fine. I don't know.
Is that the deerskin one?
Yeah.
It's a little more, I would say, stretchy than than the
We got
Then the
this one.
goat.
yeah, the goat is a little more dry.
The goat. You got your phone on silent, Louis?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Um, I like the G Pen sticker.
Yeah, I hit that. Sponsored.
Matt.
Ain't a
Matt.
lot of pens over the past 5 years. So.
Hey. I just lost one.
This
You
is
got an
cool.
extra?
Alright. I'm not definitely not playing this one
That's cool. Yeah.
because I'm saying I'm gonna play this one.
Yeah.
Alright.
Cool. Nobody has to really play Primo if Alexis is usually gonna play it.
Yeah, he can never.
Or else I'll hold it down on these. And you guys can play two panderos. But we don't have a guiro, whatever. Yeah, we don't need both.
Yeah, we. I mean, I think if y'all did.
You want it? Would it make any sense to put it like right here and maybe pick up some balls?
See.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just put it up and get like a little choir vocal thing. Yeah. Yes, because she's gonna use that for her PA stuff. But it's kind of hard to it's like chanty. It's words in Spanish, but it's chanty, so it's not super. It's not important that it needs to be like heard by the singer.
Check two. Hey, hey. 1, 2. I'll turn you on.
Great.
Check two.
I don't know.
I'm just gonna check
Because
it
she said
out.
we were gonna start right away.
Alright, cool. We should just stay here. Or we just fine. Just phone. You say no, we're not gonna, nobody's gonna primo, we just play straight through?
No, that's gonna be for the plena. We won't have the primo planero.
Oh, okay, no, no, what
She'll
is it
do
called?
the
Quinto?
yeah. We'll no requinto. We'll just do like salidor, whatever the
What
other
songs
one's
are we
called.
gonna,
I
we
don't
play
know.
the easiest part. We've been playing that in a long time.
Yeah, we'll be good. We'll be good. Is gonna break something over
Just let
there.
me get the,
That's gonna be Maria's part, I think.
so I'm,
Yeah. Mhm. And I'll play it on the I'll play it on the conga, so it'll sound just stand up and be by mics maybe.
Hurt their ears. They hurt their ears. I'm playing so loud.
Well, here we are. Let's walk up with the sound.
I think we were gonna see. Yeah,
Do you wanna play?
I leave in October. So I'll be gone for probably about a month and a half. No, I'm going to Europe. Just all over Europe. Huh? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's different mobilizations and actions, but it's mostly a hip hop tour. Yeah, so we're gonna be doing hip hop, but it's all like resistance hip hop, you know. Yeah. Huh? Him? He just got a promotion at his job.
From I don't know about equal.
He got a promotion.
Go ahead, Bray.
I forgot about that. Check, 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 check. Fuego, mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego, mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego, mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego, mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego. Fuego, mira el fuego. Mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego, mira el fuego, ay es fuego, fuego que se quema la hacienda. Fuego, mira el fuego, vete busca agua pa' que no se quema la caña. Fuego, mira el fuego. Bomba de Puerto Rico. Fuego, mira el fuego. Petro y la Quilbe, yo no declaré, oh no, yo no declaré. Pregúntale al abogado, pregúntale al juez. Es que yo no declaré, no, no, yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré, ay, yo no declaré, oh no, yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré. Pregunté al abogado y pregúntale al juez. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré, que no declaré. Yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, 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 yo no declaré. Pregúntale al abogado, pregúntale al juez. Petro ni la Quilbe, ay que yo no declaré, oh no, yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré. Petro ni la Quilbe, yo no declaré. Yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile, repícame la bomba, yuba la Marile. Ay, repícame la bomba, repícamela bien, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Ay, mi bomba es africana, mi bomba es antigana, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Ay, repícame la bomba, repícamela ya, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Que mi bomba es africana, mi bomba es antigana, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Ay, repícame la bomba, repícamela bien, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Yuba, 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 yuba la Marile, repícame la bomba, yuba la Marile. repícame la bomba, repícamela bien, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile. Va, yuba, yuba la Marile, repícame la bomba, yuba la Marile. Ay, repícame la bomba, repícamela bien, yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile, le. Yuba, yuba, yuba la Marile, repícame la bomba, yuba la Marile. Va, yuba, yuba la Marile, repícame la bomba, yuba la Marile, yuba la Marile, yuba la Marile. What you are listening to are the traditional Afro-Boricua sounds of bomba. So these rhythms are older than the United States of America's Constitution. In fact, they date back to 500 years and beyond and root us of what is a Boricua, what is a Puerto Riqueño. And we are a flag. Our flag represents 3 stripes, as you can see, of red, which signifies our blood. The indigenous Taíno, el Africano, and the European Spaniard. Our blood and our resistance to continue to not preserve, but to keep moving. Preserve to us feels like it's boxed in a refrigerator, right? Or in your shelter. We continue to move just like the dancers of bomba in our rhythms, just like the drums in our hands and our cantos that reach from the campo yo vivo triste all the way to the barrios of New York City, Chicago, Orlando, Houston, Gary, Lorain, Ohio, Milwaukee, the Bay Area, etc., etc., etc. Just like our names keep getting longer, so does our diaspora. And with that, we welcome, we honor these rhythms of bomba today in plena to a man who never gives up and encourages us to never give up being proud of Boricua, being Boricua, regardless if we were born there or born here. I know that Puerto Rico nació en mí. So we appreciate you. My name is Maria Isa. It's Rafael Gonzalez of Bomba Umoya and Luis Ortega Castrellón. And we are Boricuas born in Minnesota. And we're proud. And we're proud and proud. And because of what we do, this just didn't start from us picking up a book. It started by our parents and their parents and our ancestors and the legacy. And for this, we dedicate esta bomba para ti, Oscar. Campo, yo vivo triste. Cada día sufriendo más. Ay, Dios, ¿qué será? ¿Qué será de mí? Si no bailo esta bomba me voy a morir. Campo, yo vivo triste, cada día sufriendo más. Ay, Dios, ¿qué será de mí? Si no bailo esta bomba me voy a morir. Campo, yo vivo triste, cada día sufriendo más. cada día sufriendo más. Ay Dios, ¿qué será de mí? Si no bailo esta bomba me voy a morir. No pa' matar, no pa' matar, no pa' matar. Yo vine pa' morir, yo vine pa' morir. No pa' matar, no pa' matar. Yo vine pa' morir, yo vine pa' morir. Pa' mi Puerto Rico que suena como el coquí. No pa' matar, no pa' matar, no pa' matar. No pa' matar, no pa' matar, no pa' matar. No pa' matar, no pa' matar, no pa' matar. No pa' matar, no pa' matar. Con la bandera de 3 colores y una estrella. Ay, Borinquen, tú eres la más bella. Borinquen, tú eres la más bella. Sabrosa es mi bomba y la bomba es mi cultura. Sabrosa es mi bomba y la bomba es mi cultura. Con la bandera de 3 colores y una estrella. Ay, Borinquen, tú eres la más bella. Borinquen, tú eres la más bella. Sabrosa es mi bomba y la bomba es mi cultura. Sabrosa es mi bomba y la bomba es mi cultura. Es mi cultura, es mi cultura, es mi cultura, es mi cultura. Que viva Puerto Rico libre. At this time, we ask that you rise for La Borinqueña. And please feel free to sing along. It is on your pamphlets. A poem by Lola Rodriguez de Tío. And our anthem of resistance. Despierta, borinqueño, que han dado la señal. Despierta de ese sueño que es hora de luchar. A ese llama al patriótico, no al de tu corazón. De no ser simpático, el ruido del cañón. Nosotros queremos la libertad, nuestros machetes nos agarran. Vámonos, borinqueño, vámonos ya, que nos espera ansiosa, ansiosa la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad. Gracias.
Buenas noches. A ver, buenas noches. Ahí estamos. My name is René Antrop González, and I can tell you que soy boricua. So, for those that may not know, boricua is an indigenous term from the Taíno that signifies our very identity, right? Boricua is to say, soy puertorriqueña, soy puertorriqueño, ¿ve? Y con orgullo. So it's to echo Maria Isa's sentiments, is to honor, right, our indigenous roots, our African roots as well. It's my honor to welcome you to this very special evening, an evening with Oscar Lopez Rivera. It's important for me, right, to just state a couple of things. There's been a lot of organizers involved with this event across multiple fronts. A lot of organizers. You're seeing their logos up here on the screen. So this was definitely a team effort. I'm a proud member of the Puerto Ricans in Minnesota committee, led by an incredible team of folks. Please stand up. Please be acknowledged. All of those of you on the committee. Dr. Fiol, Miguel Fiol, later on will welcome us. But I got to tell you, we were planning for this event. And early on in the conversation, there was a suggestion that this event be held at the University of Minnesota. And I just had to say something. I had to raise my hand and say, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's have it at Metro State University. Don Oscar, quiero que usted sepa algo. This university has a written mission and vision, right? And part and parcel of that mission and vision is one of anti-racism. And when we're talking about colonialism, we can't divorce colonialism from a project of racism. We can't divorce it from a project of white supremacy. They're part and parcel of the same package, right? So, Oscar, you're in a very welcoming space. You're in what I call a sanctuary. Welcome. Welcome, Don Oscar. Welcome to all of you for your support. And there's something to say about courageous leadership. There's something to say about courageous white leadership. Because for those of us that have studied, right, Don Oscar? Right? Because he's taught me these things. My elders have taught me these things. Don Pedro Albizu Campos, the father of Puerto Rican nationalism, like Don Oscar, who was imprisoned in the federal prison system, okay, both in the U.S. and in San Juan, a man who was exposed to radiation in his prison cell. The Clinton administration acknowledged the use of X-rays on federal prisoners in this country. There's a long history here, a long herstory here. There is leadership that has made this possible this evening. I want to acknowledge the courageous white leadership, and I say that intentionally because there were white allies, there are white allies involved in the Puerto Rican nationalist movement. Ginny Arthur, our president, provost, Dr. Amy Gort, please, let's give them a round of applause. There was no hesitation, none, on behalf of this leadership to say, yes, Oscar needs to come here. So again, thank you for that. It's an honor. It's an honor. With that, I want to go ahead and introduce President Arthur, who will offer us words of welcome.
Well, Renee, first of all, I want to thank you for that generous introduction. I appreciate the fact that there are many people who do this work, and I'm happy to play any role I can to help support that. But it's really my pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening. Renee is right. This is the place that can do it right. Metropolitan State is really honored that we have this opportunity and the opportunity for all of us to hear the timeless rhythm of the drums that reverberated my soul anyway, and I'm sure for many of you. Maria, who we have heard here at Metro State on other occasions, and again, her great talent shows the importance of art in helping to educate and to move people to action. And of course, the great honor to have tonight with us our guest, Oscar Lopez Rivera. Metropolitan State is a place that's really enriched by being home to students and faculty and staff who come from many different communities. We truly are an international place right here on the east side of St. Paul, which is fitting because the east side of St. Paul has long been a gateway, the place where immigrants came and then made their way across the Mississippi River. We know that the issues we're going to hear about tonight are those that deeply touch and will be familiar to many of our students, faculty and staff, and their families. And not the least are profound questions about what happens in our criminal justice system and in our prison system, the way people are treated. As an academic institution committed to learning from, in, and with the communities in which we are embedded and to which we are connected, we look forward to hearing more about Mr. Rivera's experiences, his struggles, and to hear his compelling truth. It's a perspective we all must attend to and learn from. I really like to extend a special welcome. I think we have some elected officials with us tonight. Senator Patricia Torres-Ray, if you're here. Yeah, maybe we could stand. Representative Carlos Mariani, and Ramsey County Commissioner Rafael Ortega. And two of those three are my personal representatives, so special welcome. I also want to express appreciation to the University of Partners who played a role in this, and of course that is the School of Urban Education under the esteemed leadership of Dean Antrop Gonzalez. And our Institute for Community Engagement and Scholarship. And a special thanks to two important external partners, and that's the Puerto Ricans in Minnesota Committee, who did all the work to make this come together. And the NAACP Minneapolis, which is represented here tonight by its president, Jason Soul. I know I saw him out here. So thanks to all of you for being here and to bearing witness to what we're about to hear, to learn, and hopefully to go forth and be active in doing right and seeking justice. And now I'm going to turn it over to a really entertaining speaker, and that's Professor Raj Setharaju.
Others to determine who they embrace.
Dr. Fiol. I'm now going to hand over the mic, so to speak, to Dr. Miguel Fiol, who leads up PRIM, Puerto Ricans in Minnesota group. And Dr. Fiol is a neurologist, right, housed in the School of Medicine at the University of Minnesota. So, Dr. Fiol, it's an honor to introduce you. And so please, if you'd be so kind as to step to the stage.
Wow, what a group. I'm so pleased to be here. I want to thank the president for being so kind as allowing this activity to go on. I, like Rene says, and he's great part of our team. I'll wait for people to say it. We are a small group of Puerto Ricans in the Twin Cities. We've been since 2013, but you would want to guess how many Puerto Ricans in the state of Minnesota? Anybody knows? Demographics, 13,000. Ooh. So a small group like us a couple of years ago decided, of course I go back a long time, and Elsa here, Elsa Perez and I, we both came down the Minnehaha Parkway or something before there were any Latinos or Puerto Ricans here. I think if I hear a person speaking, that was 1974, I would say, wait a second, somebody's speaking Spanish. So we come a long way, baby, right, Elsa? And all the members of the committee, very old dear friends of mine. And so I'm so pleased to be here. I think that Oscar and I have had a chance to talk since he came here. I did not know him before. The only thing we shared together is the same birthday. Same age, although he's 2 days older, so he's my senior. Seniority, okay. So we're pleased to be here. The Puerto Ricans in Minnesota, it's a combined group of politics, culture, arts, identity, but especially identity, guys. We are committed. Hey? Maybe rum and coke. So we're very committed to our sense of identity, who we are, and we constantly struggle with that because, as you know, I'm not a sociologist, I'm just a neurologist. The whole issue of identity is a changing field. So our identity is evolving. I represent the old-timers, and then I have the young people like Maria Isa and other young people who are constantly challenging the concept of identity. What is identity? How do we define it? And I learn every day from young people. Now, on the serious side, Puerto Rico, as you all know, is in a deep crisis, and we are reacting to that crisis. Our homeland is in trouble. La Patria has problems. Our homeland is in trouble. And as a reaction to that, we've engaged in a process. This is our third forum or symposium where we want to talk about our issues and bring in people to educate us and give us new perspective. We want to help solve our country's problems because you know what? There's more Puerto Ricans in the United States than in Puerto Rico. Did you guys know that? The diaspora is 5 million, Puerto Rico is 4 million. In total, we're 9 million people, not a small piece. But to Congress, where are we? Any little thing out there that raises his voice, how you dare raise the voice to the master. And we react to that in a very emotional way. As you know, Puerto Ricans, if you watch me use my hands a lot, you know, we're all talking with our whole body, and Maria Isa sings her expression of Puerto Rican soul. So for Congress, we're nothing. We're a political football. They throw it around from Republicans to Democrats and then vice versa, and they all want what is in there for them. But who represents us? Nobody. Nobody represents us, guys. We are a country without a single vote in Congress. We've gone to war We've elected presidents here in Puerto Rico. You don't vote. It's a terrible colonial situation. We're committed to decolonize Puerto Rico. This small group of Minnesotan Ricans, we are committed to do this. And this is the fever in which we burn. Politics is our fever because politics defines, to a certain way, our identity. Because the worst scenario we have in our minds is become a state of the union. We sink into the pothole or whatever, the melting pot, and then we lose our identity. The identity is the blood of our spirit. We will never give up our identity. And I made that very clear when we talk in public with legislator educators. Pedro Albizu Campos, who Rene referred to, the big leader, spending years, more, I think as many as Oscar years, he says, para quitarnos la patria, nos tienen que quitar la vida. If they're going to take our country away, they have to take our lives. And we're committed to this concept of a strong national sense of who we are. Do you guys realize our country has fought 2 empires? What other nation has fought 2 empires and still stands here, a man who spent 35 years, 12 in solitary, to talk about this? This is a great nation. Puerto Rico is a nation of pride. We're not melting in the pot. And we make our group very clear of these. We believe in the voting system. We believe in democracy. We don't believe in any form of force to get our independence. But the core of our group points in that direction, although we have people who want some sort of sovereignty relation with the United States, and that's fine with me, as long as we're respected, as long as we have a voting Congress. We go to war, the war tax, we die, yet we can't say we want to go to war. They elect judges for us who rule in our country through the federal court. How is that ever seen to be just? Now, after all that passion, excuse me, but I can help it, guys. This is a very strong feeling for me. I want to share something softer. I like poetry. That's kind of my own disease. And you know, poetry is kind of disappearing. There was a story. This kid went to school, and the teacher said, "Now we're going to talk poetry." And the kid said, "Teacher, what's that? Poetry." So I'm a freak of poetry, so you're going to have to excuse me if everybody says, "Miguel, every time you get up there, you just bring a poem." So I did. And this poem is dedicated to Oscar. Now, talking to Oscar over the last few days, I got this incredible sense of Oscar's patience. How this man sat 35 years. 35 years, guys, that's almost, well, some of your ages. Sat in that cell with that pride in his heart, not giving up, and ready when the time came to go out. And he's out standing, speaking. The same Oscar who went there is here. This Oscar was not bent by anybody. So I'm just going to finish up because I know my time is up. So this poem I wrote for Oscar, it says, "We all share your resistance, Oscar. After 500 years of colonialism, we have time." The poem reads, "Each of those 35 years may have seemed the same to you. Spring came and went, and winter snow caressed those windows barred, the only witness of his hard past. He often wondered if time did exist, for like a funeral procession, he slided by his window without ever looking up or smiling at him. A memory of a roaring ocean, where seagulls dance and dance, free at last, were his only companion each night. And at daybreak, there were ravens by his window who would find breadcrumbs and for him would chant." Little did he know that far and far in the hearts and hearts of a people nation who he had given all his love and compassion would watch his days slowly pass, but felt his watch was there to surpass. Each one of us Boricua struggles like he had to keep our nation first in our hearts, so no force will ever destroy the pride that keep him alive, waiting for his time. For this nation, who has survived two large empires, that has struggled to keep his identity and his force alive, looks at this man with incredible resistance and knows how those long days and night have only made us more might. Despierta, Boricua, defiende lo tuyo.
Gracias. I've been charged with the incredible responsibility of introducing our distinguished guest for this evening. Now, among the many sponsors of tonight's event, what is the School of Urban Education, Urban Ed, Oscar? What's the connection? So let me introduce Oscar by way of a personal story, if you'll just please indulge me. I've been told, I've self-imposed a 3-minute time limit. And for those of you that know me, that's going to be a very hard thing for me to I have a mentor, Luis Moll, another Puerto Rican education scholar, who once said at a conference, whenever a professor says that they'll be brief, they're lying. I'll be brief. I can tell you that as a diasporican, most of my informative years were spent in Orlando, Florida. Now it has been for like the last 35 years, a major destination point for Puerto Ricans. I can tell you that I attended public schools, and at that time, I didn't have the theoretical wherewithal to understand schooling as a colonial project. I didn't have the language from which to theorize that. I felt it. But as Paulo Freire would say, in order to act on something, you must first understand how to name it. I've also been formally educated and informally educated in Puerto Rico. I was a school teacher in Puerto Rico. I was an ESL teacher in Puerto Rico. And what's interesting to note is that I began to yearn for a language around the ways in which schools engage in acts of physical and psychological trauma. Because we can't separate the physical from the psychological. They impact each other. And in my own readings around this colonial project, I came across the work of U.S. military generals, one of which pronounced, bullets are too expensive. Bullets are too expensive. There's an easier way to deal with Puerto Ricans. We will take care of them through schools. We'll use schools as a machination, right, to mold, right, to Americanize these heathens, these savages, these intellectually inferior, right, people. So this is over 100 years of colonialism through schools. And we know that through the Frankfurt School, schools, like many other social institutions, serve as an apparatus from which to mold thought, right? To engage, as Dr. Angel Valenzuela would call, subtractive schooling. So, to make a long story short, where am I going with all this? I came across an incredible journal article by Dr. Ana Yolanda Ramos Sayas. She's an anthropologist, currently at Rutgers. And I was a doctoral student. This is an assigned reading. There was a special edition of Harvard Ed Review, a special edition dedicated to the topic of working class education and Puerto Ricans in the US. And her article was in this special issue. And in this article, she begins to talk about a school in Chicago located in the Humboldt Park neighborhood called the Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos High School. And in her article, she begins to describe the ways in which this school is engaged with an anti-colonial project, not divorced from its community, but a FUBU school, right? For us, by us. Engaged with the community, for the community, as a reaction to the trauma inflicted on diasporicans in Chicago public schools. And the irony of all this is that one of the high schools that was engaging in this traumatic, right, inflictions is called the Roberto Clemente High School. So now you're going to use one of our, right, you're going to use a Puerto Rican, right, in name to inflict trauma on our people. To make a long story short, so my second time saying that, I came across this school. And what I found out was that Don Oscar is a founder of this high school. He's an educator. He's a community educator. And I can tell you that this school ended up becoming the topic of my dissertation. And the title of that dissertation is Schools as Radical Sanctuaries. And I didn't name the dissertation. A student, Ivan, pseudonym, of course. We can't use real names in our research. Ivan, what brings you back to this school? Of all the schools that you could attend in Chicago, what brings you back to this school? He says, Rene, it's simple. This school is my sanctuary. And that hit me, because schools for me were never a sanctuary. They were places of trauma. So I come to urban education as a result, right, of being a traumatized being, of working through that with my brothers and sisters, right, who to this day suffer in traditional schools. I sent a copy of my dissertation to Oscar when he was in prison. And Don Oscar was so gracious enough to write me in pencil, right, his analysis of my dissertation as a founder of the high school. Don Oscar, gracias por su labor. Gracias a usted por su sacrificio. Gracias. Usted es un prócer. Un prócer. Without any further ado, our distinguished guest, Oscar Lopez Rivera. Testing, testing.
Está bien. Está bien. Buenas noches. Good evening. I would like to start this conversation with the flags. This one here, was put together in New York City in 1895. That one there was put together in 1868. That one was to fight against Spanish colonialism. This one was also put together to fight against Spanish colonialism. But by 1950, in Puerto Rico, that flag had been illegalized. So if a Puerto Rican would walk around with one of those flags, he could go to jail. So imagine this, an American walking around in the United States with an American flag and being criminalized. But we were criminalized for that flag right there. So I mentioned that in order to contextualize my words. We have heard the name Don Pedro Albizu Campos, Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos. And for us, he was our teacher. For us, he was this man, a Harvard graduated lawyer, a World War I first lieutenant, and by 1934, he was already considered a criminal, labeled as such by the United States government. When people talk about people who want independence for Puerto Rico, they say, well, you're just a minority in Puerto Rico. When people say only about 5% of the Puerto Rican people vote for independentistas, we have to bear in mind the price that independentistas have paid just to keep the ideal, the dream of a free and independent Puerto Rican nation. Now, how many years have Puerto Ricans spent in prison? Since 1898, the first Puerto Ricans who were made political prisoners were two men who owned a small printing press. And the only reason they were arrested, convicted, and sent to hard labor was because they printed a small newspaper calling for Puerto Rican independence, and that was intolerable. And it's interesting because in 1898, when the United States invaded and occupied Puerto Rico militarily, they sent a general. His name was Nelson Miles. And Nelson Miles arrived in Puerto Rico, and he told the Puerto Rican people, I am here to bring you freedom and democracy. But Puerto Ricans did not know this, that 2 years before that, General Nelson Miles had told Geronimo the same thing. He told Geronimo, hey, there's some land for you. There's some land for you people. You can plant it. You can live there. You can live happily there. And the next picture that we see of Geronimo is of this warrior on his way to prison in a train. And that was the freedom and democracy that Nelson Miles gave him and his people. So 2 years later, Puerto Ricans are, of course, told the same thing. And the important thing about history is that eventually people find out what happens in a particular nation. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I was 14 years old when I was sent to Chicago. And I arrived in a city that was not too welcoming to Puerto Ricans. I had been called everything. The first thing that I was called soon after I arrived in Chicago was a spick. And I thought, some young white kids were saying, hey, you speak. I thought that they were asking me to speak. And I said, me no speak English. I did not speak English. But they were calling me a spick, something different. And then after that, I faced at a very early age discrimination, racism. But I did not allow that to poison me, because I had a cousin and she said, do not pay attention to those things. I went to high school, graduated from high school. I started college. I dropped out of college. And in 1965, I was called by Uncle Sam. Now, at the bottom of that letter, there was a caveat, and he said, if you do not report to the induction center on the specified date, you can face up to 5 years in federal prison. And I was a happy-go-lucky Puerto Rican. And I said, no, this Puerto Rican is not going to prison. So I allowed myself to be drafted. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I went to Fort Hood, Texas. And for about 8 months, I was trained for one thing and one thing only. I was trained to kill. And when I finished my training, I became the battalion librarian. And a month after that, I got a letter. I got orders to go to Vietnam. And I arrived in Vietnam the 17th of March, 1965. And I had orders for a particular place. And they were calling names for the 1st Infantry Division and calling names. And a friend of mine from Chicago, who had been with me in training in Fort Hood and in Fort Knox, Kentucky, she said, hey, Oscar, they're calling your name. I said, well, 1st Infantry? He said, yeah, you coming with me. So I ended up with the 1st Infantry Division. For the first time in my life, I was walking under the shadow of death. I've seen it all. In Vietnam, I saw everything that there was to be seen. And I don't know how people feel about wars. I know how I feel. I know how Dr. King named the Vietnam War. Because I came home in 1967. And soon after I came home, for the first time, Dr. King pronounced himself against the war in Vietnam. And he labeled it, and he called it a criminal war. And it was a criminal war. And I have been engaged, and I have been involved in a criminal war. And from that moment on, I became an opponent of the war. And from that moment on, I started to learn about Vietnam. And Vietnam had a beautiful, beautiful history. A beautiful history. They never allowed anyone to dominate them. And Chinese, Japanese, French, And if there's something interesting, is how the Vietnamese fought the French. And Dien Bien Phu, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, tells us a lot about how to not allow people to dominate you. The Vietnamese people did not allow the French to be there, and they chased them out. And by 1975, the U.S. military presence in Vietnam was no longer there. But wars are terrible. I've been called a terrorist. And people can call me anything that they want to call me. They can call me a dead dog, they call me pig, they can call me anything that they want to, you know. It's not going to bother me. Because throughout my life, I know what I have done. And I think that one of the things that I learned from Vietnam was how precious and how fragile life is. And to be respectful of life. So when anybody talks to me about being a terrorist, or anyone wants to know if I'm a terrorist, I would tell them, you know, if there was any evidence that could be put together, I wouldn't be standing here. Life is precious. Life is precious more than anything else when you find meaning and purpose in life. Human beings, every human being should have at least the opportunity to experience those two things, meaning and purpose in life. And up to 1967, I had lived, and I thought I had lived. I had thought of the American dream, and I thought that I could, you know, achieve the American dream. But little did I know that the dream is also a farce. So I chose not to follow the dream. I chose to do primarily two things. To do something for the Puerto Rican community in Chicago, and to do something for Puerto Rican independence. And when I arrived in Chicago, we used to hang out. I was a young Puerto Rican once, so we would be hanging out. And so we were hanging out, and there was this nationalist, and he said, hey, young guys, you know, I have some tapes. I have some tapes of nationalists. And I invite you to my house, and you can listen to the tapes. And we're listening to the tapes, and all of a sudden, there was a woman's voice in those tapes. And she said the following: I came to Washington not to kill anyone, but to give my life for Puerto Rico. Her name was Lolita Lebron. She died in 2010. She spent 25 years of her life in prison. But when I heard her voice, and that was 1967, I committed myself to do everything I could to help to get him out of prison, to get her and her co-defendants out of prison. There were 5 Puerto Ricans in prison. 4 of them have been in prison since 1954. Lolita Lebron, Irving Flores Rodriguez, Andrés Figueroa Cordero, and Rafael Cancel Miranda. And there was one who had been there since 1950. His name was Oscar Collazo Lopez. We share first name and one of his last name. And we waged a campaign little by little. And on the 10th of September 1979, President Jimmy Carter, to his honor, allowed them to come out of prison. 4 of them, because one had already been sent home because he had cancer. It was terminal cancer, and he was on his way to the grave. But they came home from prison. Puerto Ricans from all over welcomed them. They were welcome in Chicago, they were welcome in New York, they were welcome in Puerto Rico. And they were called 5 national heroes. And they were definitely 5 heroes. And there's only one of them who's still alive, and that's Rafael Cancel Miranda. And I think that he was once here in Minnesota. And it's a great man, a great, great Puerto Rican. Now, after 1979, several of us ended up in prison. And there was a time in the 80s when there was about 43 Puerto Ricans for different reasons, but all for political reasons, in prison. And little by little, they started coming out of prison. And campaign after campaign, in 1999, President Clinton gave clemency to 13, offered clemency to 13 of us. He excluded 2 of my co-defendants. And they went home, the ones who were given clemency. Not all at one time, but they were home. My two co-defendants, one came out at the end of 2009, and the other one came home in 2010. And I was one of the persons who was offered clemency in 1999. And I chose not to accept the clemency. And I would have had to do a little bit more time, but I chose not to do it, not to accept President Clinton's clemency. Because 2 of my co-defendants have been left out, and I had never left anyone behind, and I will never leave anyone behind. And for me, it was and for me, principles are very important. So it was on the 17th of January 2017 when President Barack Obama commuted my sentence, but I had to spend a few months more without being able to walk the streets of Puerto Rico. But on the 17th of May of 2017, I was able, for the first time in many years, walk on the streets of Puerto Rico as a Puerto Rican with all the dignity, all the love, all the strength of spirit that I had been able to harness while in prison. I walk with my dignity, my head high, and a very proud Puerto Rican. A Puerto Rican that had been sent to prison for something called seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States by the use of force. Now, Puerto Rico has a national poet. He passed away. His name was Juan Antonio Correger. And Dr. Fiol likes poems, and I imagine that Dr. Fiol likes Correger. And Correger, when I was in prison, we talked about, I called his house and we talked about, and he said, don't worry, seditious conspiracy is an impossible crime. And I believe so. You know, I believe it's an impossible crime. So, yeah, I was sent to prison for an impossible crime. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. You know, I still had to do 35 years, 11 months, 2 weeks in prison. Prison, and this is probably the point that I want to make here, more than any other point. The history of prison in this country is a real sad one. For example, this country has the death penalty. I was 14 years old when I arrived in Chicago. I said that before. While I was in Puerto Rico, I had very little access to books. Came to Chicago, and one day I'm walking on Division Street towards my uncle's grocery store, and I saw this building, and I saw people walking in there. I could see books, so I decided to walk in there. And I'm looking around the books, and a young black man came and asked me if I was looking for any particular book, any special book, and I told him that I did not speak English, and he switched into Spanish. And he said, well, we don't have any Spanish books, but look around, and probably you find something that is of interest to you. So I was looking around, and I found this book, Zacco and Vanzetti. And Bartolomeo, I said, Bartolomeo, oh, that's a Spanish name. So let me read this one. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zacco and Vanzetti, but these are two anarcho-syndicalists who came to the United States, who were organizing workers in the textile industry. And somewhere somebody was killed, and both of them were charged with the assassination. And both were sentenced to death. And from many parts of the world, they called for their freedom. But there was the big corporate interests of the textile industry, and both of them were killed. So at age 14, I learned something about the death penalty. And, you know, I would say, if you haven't read Zacco and Vanzetti, you know, you should read it. Or you can read, you know, about Joe Hill. You can hear about a lot of the people who were trying to organize the workers in this country, and they were sent to prison or they were killed. So it's not only the person who commits a crime, but Haymarket riot, Haymarket in Chicago, you know, they were sentenced. 4 of them were sentenced to death. You know, nobody cares. You know, they get killed. I have met prisoners who have spent 17, 18, 19 years on death row while being innocent. Now, spending those many years behind bars can destroy a human being, especially when the person is innocent. So I learned, this is something about prisons. When I came home in 1999 for the first time, I enter a penitentiary. I have been invited to Pontiac Penitentiary in the state of Illinois to speak. I was invited by members of the Nation of Islam. And I and a lawyer and some other people went there to speak to the, I better be careful with that word. I went to speak to, we went to speak to the prisoners. And we talked, and I was, they had a thing a little bit higher than this. The room was a little bit dark. And when I was speaking, I noticed faces that were familiar to me from my neighborhood. And I thought that they had just moved out of the neighborhood. I did not know that they were in prison. So after we finished speaking, we were allowed to mix with the prisoners. And it was a wonderful conversation. They were telling me about their situation, what they were going through, having no family visits because Chicago was too far. They couldn't afford to come down to Pontiac, Illinois, to Lincoln, Illinois. They were talking about how difficult it was, their cases, how they got charged, how they got convicted. And when I came back to Chicago that day, I went to a church. I knew the pastor, and I asked him if it was possible to use his van. And we started once a month to take family members who wanted to go and visit their loved ones in prisons. And a year later, I was invited by a professor from Northwestern University who had started a program with Lockport Community College, and they were teaching at Stateville Penitentiary. So my brother and I went to Stateville Penitentiary to teach. And another very difficult experience to see friends that I had not seen who were in prison. And I remember the first day that my brother and I went to prison, and we are with the staff of the penitentiary, and the inmates were down at the bottom. So I asked the warden if I could go down. I wanted to see what they were eating, so if I could go down and talk to some of the guys. He said, yeah, so I went down. I came back up, and I asked the warden one thing. If he thought that if the inmates would be guaranteed a salary equal to the amount of money that the state of Illinois was spending on each one of them, would they be coming back to prison? And he said, of course they'll be coming back to prison. And I told him, well, I think I beg to differ. That was 1970. And things evolve, things change. My brother and I were only there to help the program get started. We brought some other people to go and teach. In 1987, I was facing a trial in the city of Chicago. And there's a man sitting on the audience. He was part of the audience. And my lawyer came and said, hey, Oscar, there's a guy who wants to talk to you. And I looked, and it looked a little bit familiar. They put me back whenever they went into a recess, they would lock us up in a pen, so I'm there, and my lawyer asked me if I would speak. I said, yeah, So he came in, And he said, you don't remember me, right? I said, no, I do not remember you. He said, I was the warden in Stateville Penitentiary. And I wanted to tell you this. You were right. You were right. He was working for ACLU with an alternative prison project. Now, in 17 years, he had learned that the $6,800 that the state of Illinois was spending keeping those guys' warehouse in there, if they had spent them keeping them out, mostly all of them would have been out and probably been living productive lives. But that's what prison is like. You know, people seem to say, well, you know, they deserve to be there. How do you know? We know when we're there. We know when a loved one is there. That's when we know. Other than that, we do not know. It's a system that just to finish this up, I arrived in Leavenworth in 1981. There were three factories. Some of those inmates could make up to $400 a month, $450 a month. That was 1981. I left Terre Haute, Indiana, February 9th, 2017. And no inmate can make over $150 in prison. No one can make over $150. They got to work, in order to make $150, they work 8 hours a day. But not all of them, okay? So when I arrived in prison, 35 years later, an inmate was being treated worse than when I arrived in prison 35 years earlier. So my point is this. There's a system. There's a prison system. The prison system spends $40-some thousand per inmate right now. And what do the citizens of this country get for those $40-some odd thousand a year? You don't get a rehabilitated prisoner back. You probably get a person who's bitter, who's angrier, who has more problems than he had when he walked into the prison system. And we're told that there are no political prisoners. There are no political prisoners in U.S. prisons. Well, I would like to share with you some of the names and some of the people. There are political prisoners in the United States that go back to 1968, 1972, 1973, Jalil, Herman Bell, Sundiata Acoli, 1976, Leonard Peltier, Native American, 1981, John Lamon, Tom Manning, David Gilbert, Judy Clark, some who have passed away, some who have come out of prison. Mutulu Shakur, Sundiata Acoli. Sundiata has been in prison since 1972. And he's a very interesting person. But you know, they don't want him out. Not because there is evidence that would represent that he is a threat to anyone. Because Sundiata was a computer programmer when African Americans were not even allowed into the field. So that's part of the history. But according to the U.S. government, there are no political prisoners. And they are. And they have done a lot of time. And it pains me to be standing here knowing that they're behind bars. Now, what is it that makes us the way we are? What does it take to make a drone, fly a drone, and put it out, and probably put somewhere and kill people with it? What does it take to, make one of those stealth planes and fly them? How much money is spent on that? How much money is spent in one of the oldest wars that there is in U.S. history, which is going on in Afghanistan? How many lives? How many people come home and go to the Veterans Administration and don't get any service? Or if they get some service, it's miserable. So it's easy. It's very easy for a person who has not been involved in war. And Donald Trump, the President of the United States, he didn't have to go to war. And George Bush didn't go to war either. He was able to fly a B-52 all over the United States, but he was never sent to any. And Bill Clinton never did. George Bush did go to war, but Ronald Reagan did not. So people can send people to war. They can declare wars. They can do everything. But my point is this: we have a colony. There's a colony called Puerto Rico, and to a certain extent, we have been put in a position that is equal to almost spiritual death. We have been put into a position that we do not think as we should think. Because colonialism, one of the things that colonialism does is to colonize our minds. And one of the things that it does is castrate our minds. And it does colonize our spirits. So, in order for us to struggle, we have to struggle with ourselves first. Transcend all the colonialism, all the vestiges of colonialism. And it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's not easy. So when people say, well, it's a Puerto Rican problem, and the United States, when the world speaks on our side, the United States says, well, it's a domestic problem. You don't have any business in this problem. Well, if I go to UN and say, hey, Puerto Rico is a colony, and the colonization committee passes a resolution saying, yes, Puerto Rico is a colony, that's as far as you'll go. Because there is such a thing as a veto power that the United States has. One country, all it takes is one country, say, hey, no, and that's it. It dies. So how are we going to struggle against colonialism? Well, there's one way, and we're hoping to find it. We're hoping to find it. And that's part of the reason I'm here in Minnesota, part of the reason that I go in different parts of the world, part of the reasons that I'm in Puerto Rico, trying to do something, helping to end colonialism. And I think that for Puerto Ricans, in order for us to decolonize ourselves, we have to decolonize our minds and our spirit. And we have to do it on the sheer love that we have for Puerto Rico. Dr. Fiol spoke about the love for Puerto Rico. And I guarantee you that every person, the congas, the tambores, the Maria Isa with her voice, they have a way of lifting the spirit, lifting us, decolonizing us, getting us through the process of uniting us. We have to unite. We have to unite just on a mission of love. If we love Puerto Rico, if we want Puerto Rico to be a free and independent nation, then it behooves all of us, Puerto Ricans, and every human being who loves justice and freedom to help us to decolonize Puerto Rico. I cannot be anything else but a Puerto Rican. I cannot be anything else. But I also see myself as a citizen of this universe, as a citizen of this world. And I'll give you a good example. Not too long ago, I was in the southern part of Puerto Rico, because there are ashes that are being thrown all over Puerto Rico, poisoning the Puerto Rican people. And if those ashes, they don't stay in Puerto Rico, they go up in the air, they go into the water, and it becomes an international issue. So it's not only a problem, colonialism is not only a problem of the Puerto Rican people. And it's a problem that affects more than the Puerto Rican people. Puerto Rico has been used historically as the guinea pig of the United States. Let me point something out. In 1893, Puerto Ricans, by members of the United States Senate, were called a mongrel race. We're dirty, we're lazy, and no good. And they offered Spain $30 million for Puerto Rico. And 5 years later, they got it for nothing. But we were a mongrel race. And that's how, when General Nelson Miles went to Puerto Rico, that's what he saw. That's how he saw us, a mongrel race. And in 1917, they passed a Jones Act. And they said, Puerto Ricans are citizens. So how in the hell am I going to be a citizen in Puerto Rico if I cannot vote for the man who can send me to war, for the man who passes the law? For a judiciary system, a legislative system, and an executive system that I have nothing to do with as a Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico. Now, why call us citizens? The only reason, and this is well documented, the only reason Puerto Ricans were declared citizens was in order for us to be drafted in World War I. That was the only reason. And Puerto Ricans have served in every war that the United States has waged since we were made citizens of the United States. But yet, to this day, no Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico can vote. So how am I a citizen of the United States when I'm being imposed laws that I have not passed, laws that I have nothing to do with? No voice of ours is heard in the United States Congress, in the United States Senate, and much less in the executive or the judiciary branch of government. Now, I'm pointing this out because we're not a mongrel race. We're not lazy. We have fought hard and we have struggled hard. If we come to Minnesota, we work hard. We try to integrate ourselves into the system. And most likely, Puerto Ricans will definitely be as good citizens as anybody else. But yet, Puerto Rico and colonialism are very much alive. And I'm hoping that this message, and my message is a message of love, of compassion. Because I know for a fact that if we wake up every day and we fill our hearts with love and compassion, we can transcend. Even racists can transcend their racism if they fill their hearts with love and compassion. So I think that it is important. It is important. And my parting words today are, let's fill our hearts with love and compassion. Let's move forward. Let's make this. From our part, we want Puerto Rico to be an independent and a sovereign nation. And from the other, those who are not Puerto Ricans, I say, let's work to make this a better and more just world. We can, if we dare to struggle for it, if we dare to fight for it. And I'm talking about struggle, not any other struggle, but a struggle of love. So I leave you. I thank you very much. Very grateful for allowing me to be here. Very grateful for the support that Puerto Ricans have given me, for the support that other people have given me. And I thank you, and I hope that you have a great night. Thank you very much.
¿Va a haber una sesión de preguntas y respuestas?
Yeah.
¿Ok?
Yeah.
Chévere.
Check, 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 check. Que viva Oscar. Wow, nice turnout, nice turnout. We get a chance to ask Oscar questions, and since I got the mic, I'm going to ask him the first one. Please sit down. And Oscar, you know, in reading the bio that I saw in the program today, you know, you appear right now that you're mellow and that you're, you know, into the peace and the unity, but there was a time in your career, in your career in prison, that you attempted an escape, and that you also, so there was some behavior that you seem to have modified today. Can you share something about that?
Well, one of the things that I learned in prison, and it's very, very interesting, and I learned, I should have known that before I went to prison, is that a case against anyone can be made. You can be criminalized in prison. And it's very easy. When I arrived in Leavenworth in 1981, the FBI already had an informer working for the FBI. And that informer was not able to make what the FBI wanted him to do, so they brought another one. And these two individuals, with the help of the FBI, put together a escape conspiracy. And one of the things that I want people to know is that we never defended ourselves. We did not defend ourselves in court, because for us, the jurisdiction of the United States government over Puerto Rico and its people is an illegal one. So we chose not to defend ourselves. So any evidence can be put against us. Anything can be done, because we're not going to defend ourselves. And the reason a case of a escape conspiracy was made against me was because the FBI was not the one who caught me. They were not able to catch me. And there was a little problem there with certain FBI agents. So they thought that I deserved more years behind bars, and they made it. They made it happen. Wow. But not with the escape conspiracy that they alleged that I was putting together, because they hatched the escape conspiracy. As a matter of fact, they spent $17 million doing what they did.
Wow.
The two informers that they had, one had 12 years left behind bars, and in 1987 he walked out of prison. Okay? And the other one, between November of 1985 and September of 1986, the federal government has spent $208,000, almost $250,000 on the guy, just to do what he did. So, that's that case
Yep.
of a escape conspiracy.
Thank you.
Again, a lot of things can be said about me. A lot of things can be put together against me, but the facts will always be there. The facts will always remain. The facts that life is what life is cannot be changed. And Fidel Castro said, history would absolve me. I don't care if history absolves me or not. I know my history.
Thank you. Any questions from our audience? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Steve Merkling. I have a friend and coworker who's in New York City. You probably know him, Joe Connor. His father, in 1975, was taken from him. His father was 33 years old. Joe was 10 years old at the time. Joe's father was taken by a terrorist attack on American soil by the FALN, sorry. You were a part of that organization at the time, and I was just wondering what your affiliation was and what you have. You talk a lot about freedom and a lot about peaceful protest, and yet Joe's father doesn't see the freedom or the light of day anymore. So hopefully you can speak to that.
Of course, I will speak to that. The FBI investigated me for many years. There's not a shred of evidence that shows that I was involved in that act. There's not a shred of evidence that will show that I was in New York City. As a matter of fact, it was the 26th of January, 1975, the first time in my life that I heard of Fonse's Tavern. Okay? Now, I was in Puerto Rico. I arrived in Puerto Rico on the 9th of January, 1975. On the 11th of January, something that very few people know, we celebrate the birthday of Eugenio Maria de Hostos, a Puerto Rican patriot, a Puerto Rican scholar, very intelligent person. And on that day, somebody decided to put a bomb in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, when Puerto Ricans were celebrating the Hostos' birthday. An 11-year-old child and a 28-year-old worker were killed on that day. 10 people were injured. Now, how many people have heard of that? Now, I've been asked, and same thing that the gentleman just spoke about. I can challenge the FBI if they have any evidence against me to bring it. Because when I say that life is sacred to me, it is sacred to me. And now, the FALN took responsibility for the act. That's true. But the fundamental question here is, was I part of that? And I say I wasn't part of it. So I do not condone the act. I do not favor the act. And if I had anything to do with anything like that, it would have never happened. It would have never happened. So that's my position.
Thank you.
Regarding that.
I have a question here.
Gracias, Cito, para venir hoy. Thank you very much for your presence. Very illuminating. I'm interested, I understand that you, during your sentencing and your time in prison, that you were in solitary confinement for 12 years, continuously? And I'm wondering, how can you cope? How were you able to cope with that kind of brutalizing time?
Prison is a very hard experience, even without being in that environment. But human beings have the capacity to deal with situations that are very, very difficult, situations that are very, 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 very painful, and situations that are dehumanizing. We have to find within us the strength to face challenges. And I think that for me, it was a question of always being able to deal with situations like being in confinement. And there are ways. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that the most precious thing that human beings have is time, because it is the one that we cannot recuperate. So for me, whether I was in solitary confinement, whether I was all by myself in a cell, whatever I was, for me the question was always what I was going to do with the time. So I would get up early in the morning and I would make sure that I would use my time for something that I felt was good. Whether it was reading, writing, doing whatever I needed to do in order to keep my sanity, in order to keep myself going. So I did everything. I would exercise, I would do everything I could to make sure that the conditions would not affect me, that the conditions would not allow me to lose my spirit and to lose hope and to lose sight of what my goals were in life.
Thank you. There was a question over here.
My name's Tony Lane. I'm with the Socialist Workers' Party, and I want to thank the organisers of the meeting for organising this, and also thank Oscar very much for coming and speaking here, and all the speaking that you're doing around the US and around the world. I particularly appreciated what Oscar said tonight, because you got a little bit of the connection between what the colonial status of Puerto Rico means for Puerto Rico and what's happening to working people in this country, what you explained about the US capitalist justice system and so on. Because our party says that this is not just a question for Puerto Ricans, it's a question for all working people in this country. A leader of our party spoke at the United Nations hearing earlier this year when Oscar was at, and he said, this is Osborne Hart, he said, a successful struggle for Puerto Rico's independence from Washington's domination is also in the interest of all working people in the US. And we firmly believe that, and we want to discuss We want to discuss that with working people everywhere. There's a lot of discussion happening in this country today among working people about what's happening, the deep, deep crisis, and we think Puerto Rico should be put right in the middle of it. You see what's happening in Puerto Rico, you see the future that's coming towards working people here. The last thing I want to ask is, Oscar, could you explain a little bit more about the FBI and its history in Puerto Rico? I heard you speak in Chicago when you just got out of prison, and you went through some of the crimes carried out by the FBI. The FBI gets a lot of kudos today. They had this guy, the former head of the FBI, running the special prosecutor in Washington. But what is the real history of the FBI, if you could explain that to us,
well,
particularly in Puerto Rico?
The best history of the FBI can be seen in the COINTELPRO papers. The FBI made it its mission to destroy the independence movement. But it came at a particular time. It starts right after the sugarcane workers of 1934. They go on strike. And they're led by Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos. And for the first time, the sugarcane workers win a strike. And for the sugar barons, especially those who had a lot of interest in Puerto Rico but were in the United States, it was unacceptable because they had won a little bit more money for their working hours. And right after the strike is when the United States sends Francis Rigg to Puerto Rico, sends Winship to Puerto Rico, sends Cooper to Puerto Rico, and all of a sudden, nationalists are being indicted. In 1935, Juan Antonio Correger was put in prison because he refused to turn over all the papers of the Nationalist Party. And by 1937, Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos and 7 others, including Juan Antonio Correger, had been sentenced to 10 years in prison and sent to Atlanta. And that was like the beginning of the work of the FBI. Now, again, it became the mission, especially of J. Edgar Hoover, to destroy Puerto Rican nationalism. But it's always related, most likely, with strikes in Puerto Rico, with the workers in Puerto Rico. Whenever workers went on strike in Puerto Rico, whether it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the FBI would be there. And it was always against primarily the working class. So yes, there's a connection. There's a big connection. And history, again, if we want, we can read COINTELPRO, and COINTELPRO papers are there for the public reading, so we can see how vicious the attacks were. People were killed, Puerto Ricans were killed, Puerto Ricans were sent to prison, and yes, it was primarily directed at Puerto Ricans who were trying to struggle for better wages and for probably the independence of Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Oscar. We have a question here.
Greetings, Oscar Rivera from the Minnesota Cuba Committee. I was recently invited to Harlem for the huge Democracy Now! Reunion with Amy Goodman, Noam Chomsky, and so my question for you, out of that experience at Harlem, do you know the legal address of the Rockefeller family, Rockefeller Bank in Puerto Rico? I was given that once years ago for service. What might be their legal address for service? Right out of Harlem and right out of that church. Thank you. God bless you.
I'm going to have to ask you again to give me the question so I can get it.
Do you know the legal address
Uh-huh.
or service of the Rockefeller banker family in Puerto Rico? Somebody gave it to me years ago when I was working on the Carmen Valentin case. There is such an address.
Yes, there is, but unfortunately, I do not know it. But it is interesting because the Rockefellers, there's Dorado, and in the 40s, right after World War II, they saw this beautiful area, and they said, well, if we invest in Puerto Rico and build some hotels, we can make some money. And the investment was probably $100 million total. And in 10 years, they had made that into $1 billion. So they multiplied their $100 million into 10 times. So that is one of the reasons Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, is because they can put their money in there, make the money, take it out. The money doesn't stay, the capital doesn't stay in Puerto Rico. We have the foreign investors, and they of course, pharmaceuticals, Walgreens, Walmart, they all go there. And what they do is that they get the money that Puerto Ricans spend and bring it out. That money doesn't stay in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, the reason there's a big debt right now, a $73 billion debt in Puerto Rico, is because the colonial administrators, they invite the foreign investors to put their money there, buy, and make their money and take it out. As a matter of fact, the pharmaceutical industry used Puerto Rico. They would make medicines in Brazil, in India, bring it into Puerto Rico, say that it was made in Puerto Rico, and that way they would jump. They wouldn't have to pay taxes on the money that they were making, and it was all a sham. So, yet I do not know the address, but I do know the money that they were making, how profitable Puerto Rico is to foreign corporations.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Carmen Valentin, probably she's got it. And I'll make sure that I'll ask her as soon as I get back to Puerto Rico. And I'm going to make sure that you'll get it.
Patricio, my name in Spanish.
Yes, Patricio.
Okay. Thank you.
No.
We have a question.
Yeah, my name is Ricardo. And first of all, I want to say that my family still has a flag that was sewn for us by a friend during the time when it was illegal to own it. And also that I arrived from Puerto Rico in Chicago in 1967. We'd have a lot to talk about. But my question, what I'm interested in, has to do with access and circulation of information in prison. You've only been out since May. You were inside for 35 years. To what degree were you able to keep in touch with developments in Puerto Rico and the outside world through news media, through correspondence, and through circulation of word of mouth in the prisons?
I think that I was very fortunate because I was able to keep very well informed. For years, I kept a subscription to the New York Times. I stopped it when Abe Rosenthal went into one of the prisons that I was in, and before he saw me, just almost about 10 meters away from the cell, he started calling me a terrorist. And so I asked Abe Rosenthal if when the British were calling the IRGM, a terrorist organization, especially after the King David Hotel bombing? And he said no. So I kept on asking your names, your presidents of Israel who were part of the IRGM, were he there to call them terrorists? And he said, yeah, he wouldn't answer. So that day I told Abe Rosenthal, who was the president of the New York Times, I told him, from this day on, I will always refuse to read your newspaper. Because if people, see, that's the problem sometimes, people hear something, and right away they make that to be the truth. And so he had the goal to call me a terrorist, but he will not call Isha Samir, he would not call Menachem Begin, he wouldn't call them terrorists. But they were part of IRGM, and they were part of the people who bombed the King David Hotel. So if the British could do it, but New York Times wouldn't do it. So that's that double standard, that way of defining people, that very sometimes defining people who have nothing to do with what they are saying that they did. But again, I think that I was very fortunate because of the amount of material that I would get, and because of the information that I was able to receive, and the stuff that I was able to digest while I was in prison. So I was very, very, very fortunate for having access to information.
Hi, good evening. My name is Maria Sanchez. I started reading letters that Oscar wrote to his granddaughter and that appear in the newspaper. I was doing my master's degree in mathematics at that time in New York, and I wrote you a letter, and you responded, and it was fantastic. And I could tell that you were very intellectually stimulated and excited about what I was pursuing, and I appreciate it. Now I'm here doing my doctoral degree, and I'm the first Puerto Rican ever in the program. Thank you. I want to ask you, since higher education in sciences in particular is not diverse, it's very hard to see Black, Latinos, and we're in a university right now and in a city that is very diverse. What is your message in terms of our education, of how can we enrich our history, and which places do you find inspiration to learn about yourself in literature or in other means? Thank you.
I think education is a must, and I believe that we should have access to it. I believe that every human being should have access to a good education. I believe that some are fortunate and they have access to it. If you have access to a good education, then share it. Educate the other. Somebody mentioned the whole thing of a high school that we founded in the city of Chicago. And when we started the high school, we had $276 in the bank. You cannot start anything with $276. But we had the courage to do it. We had the love to do it. And we were able to get it going. And a few months ago, I was able to go to the graduation where 82 students were graduating from that high school. And some of them, quite a few of them were going straight into college. So that was a very good experience. My message is always, if you have a learning opportunity, take advantage of it. Any opportunity that you have, it doesn't matter the age, we never stop learning. Human beings do not stop learning. It's a myth. It's a myth that we get to a certain age. As long as we want to learn, we can learn. And if we're blessed with an education, we're blessed with some knowledge, then the best thing to do is share that blessing with others. And I think that's my message would be, Learn as much as you can. Take advantage of every opportunity that comes to your way to learn. And when you get it, when you are in a good position, share with your knowledge with the others. And the others, make it a chain, keep on passing it on, you know. And I think that we will be a better people when we do that, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have... couple of things. We have time for 2 more questions. Our goal is an 8:15 stop on the questions. And then I'll make some announcements, and then we'll go from there. Okay?
2 more questions?
2 more questions. So
Okay.
one on this side, and then perhaps one on your side.
Okay.
Okay?
I got her.
Hello. Over here. I don't know if anybody's here. My name is Marie Garza. I am born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. Attend Metropolitan State University. My background is in healthcare and the criminal justice and law enforcement. I think a lot of people who are people of color go into an area like criminal justice and law enforcement in hopes to be a part of that change, to have a seat at the table, to create policy or work in an environment where you don't see people that look like you. And I work currently in a place where I don't see very many people that look like me. I see them on the opposite end of the bars, but I don't see them where they look like me. And as a natural-born community organizer, activist, I have angered some people in Ramsey County because I choose to advocate for people like me that are Latino, that are Hispanic, that are African American, and it's a hard fight to fight when you're the only one on the inside. So my question is to you, what is it that you, not what you think, but people like me need to be fed, because it's a really hard work, it's tiring, and you're battling this monstrous, huge mountain built on the backs of our ancestors. And it is tough because you're doing the right thing by speaking up for people incarcerated. And on the other side, too, speaking up for people who are people of a color who work inside the prison system. And so my question, I think, is how, as a person that's kind of trying to uplift this, kind of what's going on into the stratosphere, how do you protect yourself? Because I'm sure there are things that you talk about and that you've done that that have probably been very draining and tiring. So I'm just looking, again, I'm just in awe about the atmosphere in here, and I had to say something, and I feel like I'm with my family. So if you could talk to your sister and let me know, I would appreciate it. Thank you. And it's an honor.
I think that wherever we work and whatever we do, whenever we challenge the status quo, it's a positive. It's a positive. We may not get the answers or the response or the results that we would like, but at least there is gratification knowing that you did your part. I think one of the things that I learned from Roberto Clemente was that when he was playing for the Pittsburgh Pirates, he was not treated well at first. But he always brought with him that energy of doing what was right, of trying to bring others along with him, to make them proud, to make them feel good, to make them be better. And Roberto gave us that example. And I think that some of the players, especially the African American players who were with him, bear witness to that, because he would encourage them not to give up, not to to keep on fighting, to keep on struggling, to make themselves better. Same thing he did with Puerto Rico, and he was such a wonderful person that he died on an airplane trying to take stuff to help the Nicaraguans after the earthquake. So I think that if we want, we have wonderful examples of people who give up their lives trying to do better, trying to do the better for the other, trying to change, not accepting the status quo. There's a little article, when I mentioned Roberto Clemente, there's a little article that appeared in Life magazine criticizing Roberto Clemente and calling Roberto Clemente something that he was not. I encourage you people, because nowadays you can get into the internet, you can find all the information, to look for that little article in Life magazine, because it is really, really a disservice to journalism, what they wrote about Roberto Clemente. It's a small article, but Roberto Clemente did never allow that to affect him. The criticism that he was a crybaby, the criticism that he was always complaining. And I think that it helps us when we do the right thing. It helps us when we do not accept the status quo. It helps us to struggle to make ourselves better. And we make ourselves better by helping the other, by struggling with the other, to think not only of the I, but also to think of the other.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It was very powerful when you said the names of political prisoners here in the United States. Also, it's honorable, and I think as a matter of principle and as a matter of modeling solidarity, for example, your decision to withgo the clemency offered because of your codependents were not offered that same thing, right? My question is, through your conversations or relationships with other folks that are still incarcerated, either in the United States or in other spaces, are there messages that you believe they would want you to pass along to us today?
I think that the best message that I can pass on to everyone here is that if we have the opportunity of meeting somebody like Mumia Abdul-Jabbar, if we have the opportunity to meet somebody like Sundiata Akol, if we have the opportunity to talk and share moments with Mudulu Shakur, we will see their humanity, we will see how important and how much of a contribution they can make to our communities, to whatever community they go to, and to this world. And I think that the best message that I can bring to anyone is that they are political prisoners. They are in prison because of what they wanted, and they wanted either for their people or for everybody else for there to enjoy freedom, justice, and what was right. And I think that we have, from my side, I think that I have an obligation to do as much as I can to help as much as I can to see if we can get them out of prison. And I think that, and the other thing is that it doesn't take anything just to write them. It doesn't take anything but a stamp to let them know that you are concerned. And I think that a letter, one single letter sometimes gives us hope and encourages us and gives us the energy to move into the other day. And I think that in prison we need to see the other day. We need to see the possibility of coming out of prison. So I would say, write them. It doesn't cost anything. Just a letter, a 50, 47, 48 cent stamp on an envelope on a piece of paper. And I think that would mean a lot to people like the ones who are in prison for political reasons.
Thank you, Don Oscar. Before I make some announcements, again, let's please honor our distinguished guest with applause. Thank you, Don Oscar.
I used to write one of your comrades, Malcolm Campa, when he's in Terre Haute. I wrote him 545 letters.
A couple of announcements. I'd be remiss, right, if I weren't to thank some additional folks that have made this event possible in addition to the sponsors that you see up on the screen. A lot of you came to know about this event through a flyer, right? And so I want to thank our marketing and communications folks here at Metro State. I want to thank Pauline Koo. I want to thank Robert Booth. I want to thank Maddie, and I want to thank Diane. Right? I want to thank Maria Isa, right, for helping construct tonight's program that helped guide us, right, during this very special evening. And I want to thank our incredible artists. Thank you for sharing with us, right, your love. So, a couple of things. If there are still books for sale available, the Metro State Bookstore has for sale just outside, cash or checks accepted, a book that Oscar wrote. It's called Between Torture and Resistance. So on your way out, you could peruse the books if there are any left, and then decide if you'd like to make a purchase, right? That's a way to extend the conversation, right, on your own and with others. Also, we have these cards available. The Puerto Ricans in Minnesota Committee, and we're essentially wondering if you'd be interested in working more with our group. If so, please complete a card and drop off out in the common area and of the auditorium, please. And I think that should be about a wrap. So please, Maria Isa, and artists. La bandera puertorriqueña. Qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, la bandera puertorriqueña. Qué bonita bandera, la bandera puertorriqueña. Qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, la bandera puertorriqueña. By the way, you know that Oscar made his way here he came from Puerto Rico, and there he comes with a guest as well, and her name is Dr. Rivera Perez. Dr. Perez, would you please rise and be acknowledged? Thank you. And last but not least, right? I'm proud to say that in the School of Urban Education, right, Rosa and Paul, among others that may be out of our unit. Who else is from Urban Ed here? Yes, of course, Nicholas. Hello, hello. Nicholas, Luis Ortega, among others. If I've missed you, I'm sorry. It's not intentional. But we got plenty of swag, right? And we have some Urban Ed swag. And Oscar and Deborah, they're going to be taking home some Urban Ed swag, right? So, on behalf of Metro State University, on behalf of the School of Urban Education, right, I'm very proud to provide you with an Urban Ed coffee mug, with a lunchbox, with some pens, so you'll never forget us. Okay, so, Oscar? Ven, don Oscar. Felicidades. Felicidades. Doctora Pérez, felicidades. Saludos y gracias por todo. Bien, bien, bien. Everybody, have a great evening. Thank you for coming. All right, thank you for coming. Thank you, thank you. Yes, yes. Okay, everybody, I know we're all excited to be in the presence of Oscar, but I think what the best thing to do is to perhaps proceed out to the common area, right? So please, if we could make our way to the common area and we can spend a little more time with Oscar. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to do all I can to bring them over.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do all I can.